Let me first recognize excellencies, distinguished delegates, partners, and colleagues. To begin, I think it's a pleasure to open this forum, an assembly of visionaries and doers gathered to reimagine the financial systems of tomorrow, rooted in the value of nature and empowered by digital innovation. In fact, we could argue that we are meeting at a pivotal moment in human history, one in which the planet's limits are being tested, where traditional measures of prosperity, chief among them GDP, have proven inadequate to capture the true wealth of nations or the lived realities of people. And I start with that because I think the natural question we should be asking is, so why is this important? How did we get there? And so before I tell you what and why we are here, let me do a little detour as a preview, because that will give you the context of why we are where we are now. So the first question we need to ask is, the title is Unlocking Economy, Nature's Economy Through Digital Assets. The first question really is, what is the Sustainable Development Challenge? And simply put, it is we have not achieved our potential. And so we are still struggling to develop. And so I think there are two aspects to this that we should note. The first one is a definitional issue. We have defined development as GDP, and so that's a question mark. And the second is the factors that have prevented us from achieving that potential. And we can say those are both systemic and idiosyncratic. And so I want to come back to those, but before we do that, let me tell you there is one fundamental identity that exists. It is that the opening stock plus flows during a period defines the new end period stock. That end period stock is, in accounting terms, the balance sheet of an institution, balance sheet of a country, a nation, balance sheet of the planet. And I want to add here that the problem we have had is our balance sheet elements, stocks and flows, have gone totally wrong. And so that is the context in which we are going to say why we need to do what I am going to tell you. So just one extra thing to note is how exactly, I've said stock plus flows give you new stock. How exactly do flows arise? Flows arise through value creation. So you have a stock of wealth, you have flows, which adds value, and so the new wealth at the end arises because of that value creation. So the fundamental potential to add value is what has led to value creation and what we call gross domestic product, GDP, gross national income. And it started what I call the depletive extractive resource curse, because then investors saw room to deploy their surpluses into production, which then created value addition and therefore created additional wealth. And so there's the incentive issue here of what is it that we should be producing and how are we deploying the excess surpluses. And what eventually occurred is over the last 100 years, we have defined what we call a production boundary, which is what constitutes value addition. And we have a financial asset boundary, which says what types of instruments we can use to create the financing of those production activities. And that is, in essence, what is our problem of today. Because what we can recognize is, therefore, the basis of all of what we think of now as our decision-making is actual data from that production boundary and data from the financial asset boundary. And so data is our basis, and data ought to be the basis of our future. Except that what we need to do is to redefine what data means. And we want to redefine it both in terms of the way it is captured, so that we'll have to include digital data. If we have to define the scope of that data, what does it cover? In other words, shift our production boundary. And we have to redefine the financial asset boundary by creating new instruments. And when we do that, we will shift the idea of the limits that have defined or constrained our potential to develop. So that's the basis I want to be able to talk to you about. And so we will do this, in essence, in three ways. We want to be able to say that what we have done is created a depletive, extractive economy where we have been taking things away. And in principle, the flows we have been creating have not been adding to the wealth of the planet. And what we need to replace it by is a regenerative economy whereby the flows will increase the wealth of the planet. So that is the fundamental aspect that we are looking to do. And to do that, we need to get rid of GDP because that has limited us. And we need to get rid of the idea that our production and asset boundaries are what they were before, because that has limited us. So that is what the bank is all about. And so I want to be able to say, this is where we are today. And out of the crisis of today, we need to see the opportunity. And so today, what I want to do is to offer a proposition. And that proposition is that real-world natural assets, our forests, our oceans, our reefs, our wetlands, and ecosystems that sustain life can be the cornerstone of this new regenerative economy that I speak of. One which value is not only extracted, but value is regenerated. One in which development is not only financed, but it is future-proofed. At the Development Bank for Resilient Prosperity, we call this approach asset-backed development. It is a shift from aid to agency, from vulnerability to viability, from fossilized metrics to dynamic real-world value. Digital infrastructure and data ecosystems. Remember I said all of this was about data. Everything that happens is captured in national accounts under one key framework. Who does what, to whom, when, where, at what price, and for what purpose. That is your data architecture. What we need is to broaden this to include everything, all of nature, all types and manifestations of recognizing value, and then creating national systems that will actually be able to put this together. So this digital infrastructure and data ecosystems we talk about allow us to identify, verify, tokenize, and monetize natural assets. In other words, turning biodiversity, carbon stores, and ecosystem services into investable, tradable instruments, widening the financial asset boundaries. So instruments that can back sovereign finance, attract blended capital, and deliver shared prosperity. End goal, and what every government on the planet should be interested in. This is not a future promise. It is not concept. It is an emerging reality. Across island nations and rainforest regions, governments have begun to explore how tokenization of natural capital can unlock liquidity for climate resilience, unlock liquidity for community development, those local communities near shore, offshore, and at the same time, unlock liquidity for conservation. That's the regenerative aspect of the planet that we are talking about. But to move from pilot to policy, from idea to institution, we must build a new financial architecture because it has to operate within the boundaries of the asset holders, the surplus people, investors, wanting to integrate their funds to conserve, create, regenerate, but to equally generate value subject to increasing planetary wealth, which is now diminishing, not increasing. So once we recognize that, we will come to one inescapable solution, one that recognizes nature as capital, one that integrates digital public infrastructure, governance frameworks, and inclusive data systems as the necessary pillars to generate the new world that we are talking about. And that is the mandate of the DBRP, to serve as a purpose-built platform or purpose-built movement, not an institution, a movement, where small states, climate vulnerable nations, local innovators can turn natural wealth into economic strength. So let me be clear. This is not about financializing nature. It is about valuing it accurately. For too long, we have been of the perception that the planet is infinite. And because it is infinite, everyone knows if there's an unlimited supply, the value is zero. And therefore, what we need is to give value to every aspect of the planet. Then the incentive structure will be corrected. We will solve our climate problem, solve the sustainability of the planet, because we would be taking into account the cost of depletion, the cost of extraction, and adding value to the regenerative function that we would be actually entertaining. So we need to value it accurately, invest in it strategically, and protect it for generations to come. Else, civilization will not be ours to pass on. So today at this forum, having given you this picture, and I do know many will be talking specific elements of that, let me summarize a few questions I think I would like you to consider as part of your deliberations. Let's imagine the following. What if every mangrove forest could fund coastal protection and blue tourism? What if? Then it becomes something to say we can look to, think, effect, direct investment resources to. You suddenly give mangroves a living entity value. You know, one of my favorite phrases to Sergio is, we have built a world that thrives and gives value only to the dead. Our fish have value only when it is on our plate, dead. Our forests have value only when it is timber in the chairs, dead. Our minerals have value only when we extract it and transform it and sell it, dead. And in the process of making the dead valuable, because that's what we treasure, we are killing the very thing that produces the value Mother Earth. So that is when I say regeneration, we need to shift from living off the dead to living off the living. Yes. Okay? So the next question is, what if every coral reef became a digital asset underpinning sovereign climate bonds? Governments are sitting on potential wealth that is not recognized today because the corals have zero value. Let's give them value and use that value in the new financial architecture to generate wealth. What if every nation had the tools to define its wealth, not only by what it produces, but by what it preserves? Again, a regenerative question. So these are some of the questions that I think we need to address as we go through the different panels. And to end by making the following note, it is not a question of only technology. It is a question of will, of aligning innovation with integrity, finance with fairness, and data with dignity. Let's add value to data. So let's begin this dialogue then with ambition. We need to move boldly, as we say in Star Wars, beyond where we've ever been before, to the stars and beyond. So let's first embrace beyond GDP as the first metric that we need to be able to anchor on. Let us unlock a new development paradigm where nature, technology, and people converge to shape the economies we need, which have to be resilient, inclusive, and truly, truly prosperous. Thank you very much. Yeah.